Sorry, this table's for family only, my brother smirked, pointing toward a fold-out chair by the trash can. Everyone laughed as I sat alone. Then the bill arrived, $3,200. The waiter looked at me. I, 28 male, am a forensic accountant. I spend my days looking for discrepancies, tracing hidden assets, and finding the truth in numbers that people try very hard to hide. You'd think with a skill set like that, I would have seen the red flags in my own family sooner, but when you're in the middle of the frame, you can't see the picture. For as long as I can remember, the dynamic has been set in stone. I am the utility player, the safety net, the backup plan. My brother, 30 male, is the star. He's the idea man, the entrepreneur, the golden child who was always one lucky break away from becoming a millionaire. In reality, he's a 30-year-old with a credit score that looks like a golf score and a resume filled with 3-month stints at jobs he felt were beneath him. I, on the other hand, played it safe. I went to college, got my CPA, worked 80-hour weeks, and invested aggressively. I drive a reliable sedan while he leases a luxury SUV he can't afford. I rent a modest apartment in the city while he lives in my parents' finished basement but calls it his executive suite. The conflict usually revolved around bailouts. $1,000 here for a car repair, $500 there for a business license. My parents always brokered these deals, guilt-tripping me with lines about family sticking together and how he'd take care of us all once his ship came in. I finally stopped the cash flow 6 months ago. I told him explicitly that the bank of me was closed. It caused a cold war, low contact, and a barrage of passive-aggressive texts, but I held my ground. Then, 3 days ago, the invitation came. My mother texted me saying they were celebrating because my brother had finally closed a massive deal. She said he'd made it and they were going to this high-end steakhouse downtown at 7 p.m. She begged me to come, saying he wanted to make amends and treat me. I was skeptical, actually I was suspicious, but a small, stupid part of me, the part that just wanted a normal brother, hoped it was true. Maybe he finally landed a commission or sold one of his ridiculous app ideas. I arrived at the restaurant on time. It was one of those places with white tablecloths, dim lighting, and steaks that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I spotted them in a semi-private alcove near the back. My mother, my father, and my brother were squeezed into a plush, circular leather booth. There was champagne on the table. My brother was wearing a suit that looked new, talking loudly to a waiter who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. I walked up and said hey to everyone. My brother stopped talking and looked me up and down. He smirked and commented that I was a little underdressed, but since they let me in, it was fine. I was wearing a blazer and slacks, while he was wearing a shiny, ill-fitting tuxedo jacket that looked like a rental. I looked at the booth, which was a tight squeeze for 3 but impossible for 4, and asked where I was sitting. My brother gestured vaguely to the aisle and chuckled, locking eyes with my father. He said, "Sorry, this table's for family only, like the core unit. We didn't think you'd actually show." My mother nervously sipped her champagne and told me they asked the waiter for a chair. The waiter returned, looking mortified, carrying a metal fold-out chair, the kind you see at a high school wrestling match. He placed it at the head of the table, directly next to a busing station and a swinging door that smelled faintly of trash and dish soap. The waiter apologized to me in a whisper, saying it was against fire code to block the aisle, but my party insisted. I told him it was fine, keeping my voice eerily calm. My brother laughed, a loud, barking sound, and said the accountant finally got the throne he deserved. He told me to sit down and order whatever because it was on him and he was flush. I sat on the cold metal chair, a good foot lower than everyone else, looking up at them both literally and figuratively. I unfolded my napkin and asked what deal he closed. He puffed out his chest and said it was real estate development. He claimed to have secured the seed capital for a luxury condo complex with millions in the pipeline and that he got the approval letter that day. I asked who the backer was, and he quickly said it was private equity, big players I wouldn't know. The dinner was a spectacle of excess. My brother ordered 2 bottles of vintage Cabernet, a seafood tower, the A5 Wagyu for himself, and insisted my parents order the lobster. He kept making toasts to those who believed in him, raising his glass and pointedly ignoring me, and adding a toast to those who didn't, saying they could enjoy the free meal anyway. I ordered a side salad and water. My father asked if I was on a diet, wiping butter from his chin. I just said I wasn't hungry. I watched them. I watched the way my brother sweated. I watched the way he kept checking his phone. I watched the way my mother kept looking at him with adoration, but also a strange nervous tick in her jaw. Then the dirty trick revealed itself. My brother leaned over the table, his breath smelling of expensive wine, and said that since he was handling the big stuff now and was about to buy a massive house, he and Mom and Dad have been talking. I knew it was coming. He said he needed a bridge loan just for closing costs because his liquidity was tied up in escrow for 30 days. He asked for 20 grand tomorrow and promised to pay me back double next month. I stared at him and reminded him that he said this dinner was him treating us because he was flush. He snapped that assets aren't cash and told me not to be a crab in a bucket. My mother reached for my hand, but I pulled it away. She begged me to do it, saying it was a sure thing and he showed them the papers. She said if he didn't pay the fees by Friday, the deal would collapse and asked me to do it for the family. I said no. The table went silent. My brother hissed, asking me to repeat myself. I told him I said no. I told him 6 months ago the bank was closed. I said if he had millions in the pipeline, he should go to a bank or a shark, but he wasn't getting a dime from me. His face turned a violent shade of red and called me a jealous prick who couldn't stand that he won. I told him I didn't care if he failed or succeeded, I just didn't want to pay for it. He spat that I should enjoy my salad then and snapped his fingers at the waiter for the check. The bill arrived in a black leather folder. My brother made a show of opening it. He looked at the total and didn't flinch, which was my second clue that something was wrong. He read aloud that it was $3,200. He pulled out a credit card, a heavy black metal card, and dropped it on the tray. I froze because I recognized the sound of that card hitting the tray. It sounded just like the card I use for high-level business expenses. I looked closer. It wasn't my card, but it was the same type of elite card. The waiter took it and walked away. 5 minutes later, the waiter returned, looking uncomfortable. He leaned down to my brother and whispered that the card was declined and reported as lost or stolen. My brother feigned shock, saying it was impossible and to try it again. The waiter said they tried 3 times, and the issuer said it was frozen. My brother slammed his hand on the table, ranting about banks, and patted his pockets, saying he must have left his other wallet in the car. He looked at me, and a slow, predatory grin spread across his face. He called me little bro and said his card was glitching. He asked me to just cover it, and he would Venmo me in the morning, assuring me he was good for it. My parents looked at me, and my father, looking annoyed, told me to just pay it so he wouldn't be embarrassed. I looked at the fold-out chair. I looked at the trash can near my elbow. I looked at the lobster shells on their plates and the untouched salad on mine. I stood up and said no. My brother shouted, asking what I meant, causing people to turn and look. I told him I meant no. I didn't order the wine, the Wagyu, or the lobster, and I certainly didn't declare this a family-only table. I pulled a $20 bill out of my wallet and dropped it on the table. I told the waiter that covered my salad and the water, plus a 30% tip. I stated clearly that I was paying for my consumption and that those 3 were a separate party who would be handling the balance. My mother shrieked that I couldn't do this because he didn't have the cash on him. I told her that he shouldn't have ordered a $3,000 dinner. My brother stood up, towering over me, and threatened that if I walked out that door, I was dead to them. I smiled, the most genuine smile I'd worn in years, and said, "Not my table." I turned and walked out. Behind me, I heard the manager approaching the table, my brother screaming, and my father pleading. I walked out into the cool night air and got into my car. But I didn't go home. I went to the police station. See, here's the twist. I didn't just suspect fraud. I knew about it. That morning, I had received a notification from a credit monitoring service about a hard inquiry on my credit report for a mortgage application. I dug into it immediately. Someone had used my social security number, my previous address, and forged pay stubs to apply for an $800,000 mortgage.
The applicant was a shell LLC, and the registered agent was my brother. He wasn't asking for a bridge loan for closing costs because his money was tied up. He was asking for cash to cover the down payment on a house he was buying in my name without my consent. He had stolen my identity. The deal he was celebrating was the successful theft of my financial life. And that metal card he tried to use? I realized halfway through dinner why it looked familiar. It was an authorized user card on my father's account, an account I knew my father had defaulted on years ago. My brother wasn't just stealing from me, he was trying to use a dead line of credit to look like a big shot. I sat in the precinct and filed a formal report for identity theft. I provided the credit inquiry logs, the LLC registration I pulled from the Secretary of State website, and the timeline of events. The officer looked at the stack of evidence and asked if I was sure I wanted to pursue this since it was a felony and he was my brother. I told him he stole my identity to buy a house, and if I didn't report it, I'd be liable for the debt when he inevitably defaulted. I said I wanted to press charges. I got the police report number and immediately called the 3 credit bureaus to freeze everything. I called the mortgage lender listed on the inquiry and flagged the application as fraudulent, attaching the police report. Then I went home and waited. The fallout was immediate. My phone blew up. 40 calls from Mom, 20 from Dad, and a string of incoherent, threatening texts from my brother saying he was going to kill me and that I ruined everything. Apparently, the restaurant didn't take IOUs. When my brother couldn't pay, they called the cops. Theft of services. Since the bill was over $1,000, in our state, that's a felony. They were arrested. My parents were released quickly, as they weren't the ones who claimed to be paying, but my brother was held because he had outstanding warrants for unpaid traffic violations he had ignored for years. The next morning, the real storm hit. My parents showed up at my apartment building. I told the doorman not to let them up, so they stood in the lobby screaming until I came down. My father looked haggard and told me I had to drop the charges because the mortgage company had called and there was a fraud investigation. He said they were talking about prison time. I told him he committed fraud by using my Social Security number. My mother sobbed and said it was just a placeholder. She said he was going to refinance it into his name once the business took off, and he was doing it for them because he wanted to buy a house with an in-law suite so they could move in. I clarified that he stole my identity to buy a house for them and asked if they knew. They went silent. That was the dagger. They knew. They had co-signed the enabling behavior. They were willing to saddle me with nearly $1 million of debt so their golden child could play pretend and they could have a free place to live. I told him I wasn't dropping anything. I told him I was filing a restraining order against my brother, and if they continued to harass me, I'd file one against them too. My brother was bailed out by a friend 2 days later, but he didn't learn. He went on the offensive. He created fake social media profiles to blast me as a thief who stole his business idea. He tried to call my employer, claiming I was using drugs and embezzling client funds. This is where being a risk-averse professional pays off. I had already informed my HR department about the potential for family drama and identity theft. When the calls came in, my boss just logged them as harassment. Then my brother tried the Hail Mary. He sued me. He filed a frivolous lawsuit in small claims court arguing that I had made a verbal contract to fund his business and my withdrawal caused him reliance damages. It was nonsense. Legally, it was laughable, but it was designed to drain my time and money. I didn't just get a lawyer, I went nuclear. I hired a private investigator to look into the business my brother had been running. It turned out the private equity he mentioned was a Ponzi scheme. He'd been taking money from friends, our cousins, and even elderly neighbors, promising them 20% returns on a real estate algorithm that didn't exist. He was using new money to pay old investors and funding his lifestyle. I compiled the findings. I didn't send them to him. I didn't send them to my parents. I sent them to the district attorney who was already handling the identity theft case. And I sent them to the IRS whistleblower line. The police raided my parents' house 3 weeks later. My brother was operating his firm out of their basement. They seized his laptop, his phone, and files. Because my parents had allowed him to use their address and bank accounts to move some of this money, they were implicated. They weren't charged with the fraud itself, but their assets were frozen pending the investigation. I watched it unfold from a distance. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I felt clean. My brother was indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. The mortgage fraud was the tip of the iceberg. He is currently looking at 5 to 10 years in federal prison. He took a plea deal to avoid the maximum of 20. My parents lost the house. Not the new one they never got. I mean the house I grew up in. They had taken out a
second mortgage to pay for my brother's legal defense and to try to pay back some of the people he scammed to get leniency. It wasn't enough. They are now living in a one-bedroom rental, living off Social Security. I saw my father once, about a month ago. I was walking out of a coffee shop and he was walking in. He looked 10 years older. He stopped and looked at me with eyes full of hate. He asked if I was happy and said I destroyed the family over a dinner bill. I took a sip of my coffee and told him I didn't destroy anything. I just turned on the lights and the rot was already there. He whispered that he's my brother. I told him no, he's a criminal, and my father was his accomplice. I walked past him and didn't look back. I changed my phone number. I moved to a new apartment in a building with biometric security. I locked down my credit so tight that I have to answer 3 security questions just to buy a pair of socks. I sit at my own table now. It's quiet. It's peaceful. And most importantly, I know exactly who is paying the bill. If you enjoyed this story of financial fratricide, subscribe for more tips on how to turn a fold-out chair into a witness stand.